OceanGate's Titan submersible sent one final cryptic message before imploding, which is, drop 2 weights. But what really happened next? Today we're uncovering the tragic story of OceanGate's Titan submersible and how recent footage and testimonies have shed new light on its catastrophic implosion. Over a year after the incident at the wreck of the Titanic, we're finally piecing together how and why this submersible failed so dramatically. As a special thank you to our viewers, we're excited to announce a free giveaway of an exclusive 3D printed model of the OceanGate submersible. This detailed model is designed to float and dive in your pool, bringing a piece of deep sea exploration right to your home. Don't miss your chance to win. Participate through the link in the description or secure your own model by purchasing it on our website. Dive into the world of OceanGate with us. In the last few days, the US Coast Guard has been leading an inquiry into the Titan's implosion, and what we've learned from witness testimonies is startling. Engineers and experts, some of whom were previously fired by OceanGate, are now coming forward with critical insights into the sub's construction and operational practices. For instance, the lead engineer, who had a background working on the space shuttle's solid rocket boosters, was dismissed after he questioned some of the sub's design choices, particularly those related to safety. Then there's David Lockridge, a Scottish submersible expert who was in charge of their operations until he too was fired. His testimonies detail how OceanGate's CEO, Stockton Rush, repeatedly pushed the limits of safety. Lockridge described an incident where the sub was crashed into the wreck of the SS Andrea Doria, showing a pattern of risk-taking behavior that disregarded standard safety practices. Now let's focus on the design of the Titan. The basic structure consisted of a cylindrical carbon fiber pressure hull with titanium hemispheres on either end. The thrusters, landing gear, and other hardware were attached to this pressure vessel, creating a complex assembly. The use of carbon fiber for a deep-sea submersible was a controversial choice. Although the US Navy had successfully built a carbon fiber submersible that operated at even greater depths, the Titan's design and construction raised many red flags. Carbon fiber has high tensile strength, making it ideal for aerospace applications, but it's not as reliable when exposed to the immense multi-directional pressures found at the depths of the ocean. Deep-sea submersibles require materials that can withstand consistent compressive stress. In the Titan's case, the carbon fiber pressure section was glued to titanium end rings using an epoxy layer. This interface was crucial, as any inconsistency in how these materials flex under pressure could result in a catastrophic failure. Recently, we received the first detailed footage from a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, that inspected the wreckage. This footage provides the clearest evidence yet of the implosion's nature. The T-shaped tail cone of the Titan was largely intact but separated from the main pressure vessel, which gave us clues about the implosion's origin. What's particularly telling is the condition of the carbon fiber debris, shattered and pushed inward. From this evidence, it appears the failure began at the front of the pressure module. The nose cone, or the front hemisphere, was found without its window. If the window had been the initial failure point, we would expect water to blast inward, leading to an explosion-like effect where debris is ejected outward. Instead, the footage shows carbon fiber fragments pushed towards the rear, indicating an inward collapse, an implosion. Now, as we examine the rear section of the submersible, we can see the equipment compartment that housed support gear, batteries, communications, and most notably, the ballast weights. These weights are crucial for controlling the sub's buoyancy and descent. Interestingly, this ties directly to the final message sent from the Titan: dropped 2 WTs. At this point, let's bring in a part of an older video where I narrated James Cameron's experience during his first Titanic exploration. Capture close-ups of anchors and portholes. At one point, the turbulence kicked up so strongly that it blew the nickel-steel sub right off the wreck and set it down more than 100 yards from the ship. The sub had landed in the lee of Titanic, which shielded it from the current, so the Mir 1 crew could idle on the bottom and ponder what to do next while Segalovich held them in place with the thrusters. They had been utterly focused on jockeying around the wreck in the storm and not watching their power levels, which had been drained due to the extreme conditions. Then each began shutting down power to his respective systems. They needed to abort the dive immediately, and the pilots started pumping ballast with what remained of the power. As the sub lightened, it rose sluggishly, the wee-chung noise of its power winding down. Finally, Mir 1 gave a last feeble cough and stopped. They were rising at only a few feet per minute and dead out of power. Cameron saw the bottom falling away with agonizing slowness. At this speed, Mir 1 might need 10 hours to ascend, but at least they were going up. When they reached 80 feet from the bottom, however, the sub stopped and started to descend again. They bumped back down on the ocean floor. Stuck 2 miles from the surface in a storm, the Mir crew thought the battery might get enough of a bounce to run the ballast pump a little if it was given a break. The Titanic was about to claim another 3 victims. Eventually, the pilot tested the pump. It groaned a few weak strokes and then quit, but they started to rise again. Curiously, at 80 feet again they stopped, falling back to the bottom with a clunk. They sat for another half hour and tried again. Each time they rose, they would hit the downdraft and get thrown back to the bottom, but each time they were blown a little farther from the wreck. On the 3rd try, Cameron held his breath as they got to 80 feet and slowed, and then kept rising. Soon their rate sped up a bit, though they were still travelling at snail's pace. A normal ascent would have taken them 2.5 hours from that depth. At this rate, they would reach the surface in about 10 hours. It was going to be a long, cold, dark return. Segalovich started pulling up the floor of the sub. He reached his arm down in the darkness and grabbed a handle. "Maybe we should release some emergency ballast," Cameron recalls the pilot saying. "What? We have emergency ballast, and we'd had it all along." The Russian pilot said, "Yes, by all means, let's drop some emergency ballast." They began to rise a little faster. It would be only 5 hours to the surface. After hearing that story, it's clear that dropping ballast weights is typically a procedure used in emergency situations to abort a dive if something seems wrong. In Cameron's case, the situation was tense but manageable. His team released the weights, allowing them to surface safely. However, the Titan's situation was much more dire. The message dropped 2 WX suggests they have detected an issue, possibly structural strain or abnormal sounds, and attempted to ascend and evacuate immediately. Unfortunately, their effort was in vain. The implosion that followed was sudden and violent, giving the crew no time for further action. This starkly contrasts with Cameron's encounter, where there was time to assess and respond to the situation. The condition of the rear section in the footage also reveals clues. Since this part wasn't completely obliterated, it's evident that the implosion originated in the pressurized cabin at the front. The rear compartment, which contained the ballast weights, was forcibly separated when the hull collapsed, sending debris and fragments toward the tail. The quick release of the weights, as indicated by the final message, seems to have been a desperate last measure before the catastrophic failure occurred. So how exactly did this happen? To understand, we need to revisit some engineering principles. The Titan's hull relied on an epoxy glue to bond the titanium rings to the carbon fiber. This interface had to withstand enormous compressive forces at depth exceeding 300 meters, where pressures reach approximately 400 atmospheres. Carbon fiber and titanium have different compressive moduli, meaning they deform at different rates when subjected to pressure. If the compressive characteristics don't align perfectly, stress concentrates at the bond, increasing the risk of failure. The implosion likely began with a tiny crack at the interface, which rapidly propagated around the circumference of the hull. Imagine this. Once a crack starts, water begins pushing through, exerting immense force along the entire carbon fiber cylinder. The material buckles inward, causing shattered fragments to shoot towards the rear of the vessel. This rapid inward collapse would have pushed the pressure hull contents, electronics, support equipment, and tragically the occupants, against the rear bulkhead in a fraction of a second. The human brain, functioning in milliseconds, wouldn't have perceived the implosion before it ceased to function. But why the implosion didn't start in the middle? Now, some simulations previously suggested that the peak stress would be in the middle of the carbon fiber vessel. However, the ROV footage challenges this theory. The lack of debris in the middle, combined with the inward collapse focused towards the rear, points to a failure starting at the front. Had the implosion begun in the middle, we would expect to see fragments of carbon fiber distributed in both directions. Instead, the debris is concentrated towards the rear, supporting the idea that the interface between the front titanium ring and the carbon fiber barrel was the weak point. What about the epoxy bond? Some of the most striking revelations concern the construction quality of the Titan. Witnesses testified that the epoxy layer used to bond the titanium rings to the carbon fiber was intended to be thin and even. However, inconsistencies in this bonding process could create stress points that compromise the hull's integrity. Furthermore, the carbon fiber used in the sub's construction might have been sourced at a discount, potentially past its prime. Testimonies indicate that OceanGate may have purchased expired pre-preg carbon fiber from aerospace suppliers like Boeing, materials that were not necessarily intended for the extreme pressures of deep-sea exploration. Additionally, the footage showed an amateurish approach to some aspects of the sub's design. One such example is the atmosphere scrubbing system, which removes carbon dioxide exhaled by occupants. OceanGate's homemade prototype consisted of a plastic container with a computer fan, a setup far from the sophisticated systems used in military or research submersibles. In hindsight, the Titan submersible's implosion was the result of a series of questionable design choices and a general disregard for established safety practices. The use of carbon fiber, while theoretically feasible, demanded precise engineering and rigorous testing, standards that OceanGate seems to have overlooked. Cost-cutting measures, like the use of expired materials and makeshift atmospheric scrubbers, further compounded these risks. Stockton Rush's repeated attempts to sidestep regulations and fire anyone who disagreed with his designs reveal a troubling disregard for safety. Even though carbon fiber submersibles have been successfully built before, it was OceanGate's flawed execution and lack of adherence to strict engineering standards that ultimately led to disaster. But this story is far from over. The next few days are crucial as more testimonies and evidence come to light. We'll be here, digging deeper, connecting the dots, and bringing you the latest developments. If you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow, we'll be back with new updates from the hearing, diving even further into this profound event that has captured the world's attention. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.